They said the heads were still speaking, and that alone was enough to empty the roads before nightfall. Because whatever fear the villagers had carried before, it had changed into something worse, something that did not fade with distance or time. And when Ronan Vaughan reached the outskirts of the settlement, he saw the first sign of it. Before anyone spoke, a body lying near the well, the shape intact, the clothes undisturbed, but the neck cut clean and empty, the head missing, and the blood that should have marked the ground around it was not there, not in the way it should have been. Only a dark stain that stopped too quickly, as if whatever had taken it had also taken what spilled from it. And Ronan crouched beside the remains, his gaze steady as he examined the cut, because that was where the truth always began, and what he saw confirmed it. This had not been done in haste, not torn, not bitten, but taken cleanly with precision. That did not belong to claws or teeth, and that alone made it worse because it meant whatever did this understood what it was removing and how to do it, without wasting anything. A voice reached him, then faint and distant, not from the villagers, not from the houses, but from beyond the edge of the trees, a low, uneven whisper that carried through the air just long enough to be heard before it faded. And Ronan rose slowly, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade, because he knew immediately what it was. Not a trick, not imagination, but something real, something that should not have been possible. The villagers did not need to tell him the rest. When they finally spoke, their words broken and quiet. They said the heads were found in the forest, hanging from branches or placed along the ground. And when night came, they spoke not clearly, not in full words, but enough to call out to those who had known them enough to draw them closer. And no one who followed those voices returned, and Ronan did not ask for more than that because the pattern was already there. Something took the heads. Something kept them and used them to lure others into the same place, and that meant it did not hunt blindly. It prepared, it waited. It used what it had taken to bring more to it, and that was not the behavior of a simple creature. He stepped past the last of the houses without hesitation, moving toward the tree line where the light faded quickly beneath the canopy. The air colder there, the silence heavier, as if the forest itself held something within it that did not belong, and the path into it was marked not by tracks, but by absence. The ground undisturbed where it should have been broken. The leaves pressed flat in places, as if something had moved without weight, without leaving a trace, and Ronan followed it deeper. His steps quiet, his gaze shifting between the trees, because anything that hunted like this would not rely on speed. It would rely on position, on control. And the voice came again, then closer, this time clearer. A whisper shaped into something that almost resembled a name, and Ronan stopped for a moment. Not because it affected him, but because he needed to understand how it carried the direction slightly off from where it should have been, as if the sound did not travel in a straight line, and that told him enough. This was not just a lure. It was controlled, shaped to draw the listener away from where the source truly was, and he moved against it, stepping in the opposite direction, forcing the angle to change, forcing the sound to shift, and the forest responded with another voice, then different from the first, higher, thinner, but just as broken. And now he saw it between the trees, a shape hanging low from a branch, not moving, not swaying, but fixed in place. And as he stepped closer, the details became clear. The head intact, the eyes open, the mouth slightly parted, as if caught mid-word, and for a moment it seemed still lifeless, until the jaw moved just slightly. A faint motion, followed by a whisper that should not have come from something that had no breath to carry it. And Ronan did. Not touch it. He did not need to. He had already seen enough to understand this was not where it ended. This was where it began. The head was not the creature. It was what the creature used the tool it left behind to bring others into the same place. And as the forest around him shifted again, more shapes visible now deeper within the trees, more heads placed in deliberate positions, forming a path rather than a scatter. Ronan Vorn tightened his grip on the blade, because whatever waited at the end of that path had not yet shown itself, and when it did, it would not come alone with the voices of the dead guiding the way, and the silence behind them, ensuring nothing escaped. Once it began, Ronan did not follow the voices directly because anything that relied on sound to guide its prey expected obedience, and he had no intention of giving it that. So he moved at an angle, instead stepping between the trees in a line that cut across the path. The heads seemed to form, his gaze shifting constantly, tracking the positions of each one because the placement was not random. They were set at distances that overlapped the range of their voices, creating a continuous pull that would keep someone moving forward without realizing how far they had gone. And that alone told him, enough. This was not just a lure. It was a system, something designed to guide prey deeper, without force, without resistance, until there was no way back. The whisper came again, then closer, now clearer, shaped into words that almost made sense. A broken call that mimicked familiarity, and Ronan felt the direction shift as he moved against it. The sound adjusting to follow him rather than lead him, and that confirmed it. The voices were controlled, not fixed. They reacted to movement. They adapted to keep the prey within reach of the next point. And that meant whatever controlled them was aware not just of where he was, but of how he moved. One of the heads shifted slightly as he passed it, the motion small, almost imperceptible, but enough to matter. The eyes tracking him, not in a natural way, not with life, but with something that responded to his presence, and the jaw opened again, a whisper forming that did not match the shape of the mouth, as if the voice came from somewhere else and only used the head as a channel. And Ronan did not slow. He stepped past it, his blade low, his posture steady, because stopping here would only give whatever watched him more time to adjust. The forest thickened as he moved deeper, the light fading further, the trees closer together, the space between them narrowing in a way that limited movement without making it obvious. And that was when the first real change came. The voices stopped all at once, not fading, not trailing off, but cutting out completely the silence that replaced them, heavier than before, as if something had shifted from observation to action. And Ronan did not hesitate. He stepped forward, immediately breaking the stillness before it could settle, because that kind of silence never lasted long, and when it broke, it did so violently. The movement came from above, a sudden drop of weight from one of the branches, as a shape fell toward him fast and controlled, and Ronan reacted instantly, stepping to the side, as the figure landed where he had been a moment before, the impact light but deliberate, and when it rose, he saw it clearly. The body thin, almost weightless, its movements too smooth, too precise for something that should have been dead, the neck ending in nothing, the head absent, the cut clean and dark, and the arms longer than they should have been, the fingers extending into narrow, hooked shapes, that flexed as it moved, as if they had been altered to grip to hold rather than strike, and it did not attack. Immediately, it stood there for a fraction of a second, its posture angled slightly, as if listening rather than seeing. And then it moved its speed, sudden and sharp, as it lunged toward him, the arms reaching not to cut but to catch. And Ronan turned into it, his blade cutting across its side in a tight, controlled arc, the steel passing through the body with less resistance than expected, and he pulled back immediately, because the way it moved did not change the cut, not slowing it, not weakening it in the way it should have, and that told him enough. This was not sustained by flesh, not in the way living things were. The creature pressed forward again, its movement more aggressive now, its reach longer than its frame suggested, the hooked fingers snapping toward him. And Ronan stepped back just enough to avoid the grip before driving his blade forward into its chest, the steel sinking deep enough to matter. And for a moment it stilled its body, locking, as if the structure had been disrupted. And then it collapsed the form, losing cohesion as it fell to the ground, the limbs twitching briefly before going still. And the silence returned for a heartbeat. And then the forest moved again, more shapes dropping from the trees from both sides. This time, not one, not two, but several. Each one the same headless form, their movements coordinated, their spacing deliberate, as they closed in around him. And Ronan exhaled slowly, because now the pattern was clear. The heads were not the hunters, they were the bait. The bodies moved without them, guided by something else, something that did not need sight, only position, only control. And the moment the voices stopped, the hunt began. And the first attack had been only a test. The rest came immediately after the forms, lunging in sequence, not all at once but in overlapping motion, forcing him to divide his attention, to choose where to strike and where to move. And Ronan moved constantly, his blade cutting through the first, then the second, the bodies falling apart when struck, but not before the next reached him, their coordination tighter than it should have been, for things without eyes, without heads, and that meant something else. Guided them, something that saw through the heads perhaps, or something that did not need sight at all. And the realization settled deeper. This was not one creature. This was a system. The heads drawing the prey in the bodies, closing the trap, and whatever controlled both remained hidden, still waiting for the moment when the prey was fully surrounded, fully contained. And as the number of forms around him increased, the space shrinking with each second, Ronan Vorn tightened his grip on the blade, because whatever came next would not be another test. It would be the moment where the true hunter revealed itself. And everything before had only been preparation for it. The bodies did not hesitate after that, and the pattern of their attack sharpened immediately, as if something unseen had stepped fully into control. Their movements, no longer testing, no longer probing, but executing a sequence that forced Ronan to keep moving. Without pause, one lunged low, another from above, a third circling behind, not to strike, but to cut off retreat. And Ronan moved through them in tight, controlled steps, his blade cutting down the nearest one before it could close the distance, the steel splitting through its torso and into the space where a spine should have anchored it. But even as it fell, the others adjusted instantly, the gap closing, the formation tightening, and that told him enough. They were not reacting independently. They were responding to a single will, something that saw every angle at once and directed each movement with precision. And the realization came with the next shift. The heads around him began to change, Not in position, not in placement, but in sound. The whispers returning, not scattered, not broken, but aligned. Each one speaking at the same time, forming a layered murmur that pressed in from all directions, words overlapping fragments of names, fragments of pleas, fragments of memories that did not belong to him, but were shaped to sound as if they could. And Ronan ignored it, because anything that relied on distraction relied on hesitation. And hesitation here would be the end. The bodies pressed closer, then their strikes faster, their reach more coordinated, as if the voices strengthened the control over them, and he cut through another two in quick succession, stepping forward instead of back, forcing the space to shift, because remaining still would allow them to complete the circle. And once that happened, there would be no way out, and the ground beneath him changed slightly. The soil firmer in one direction, looser in another, as if the forest itself had been shaped to guide movement. And he turned toward the firmer ground, immediately forcing the bodies to adjust, forcing them to re-angle their approach. And for a moment, the pattern broke, not completely, but enough. And that was when he saw it. Not among the bodies, not hanging from the trees, but behind them, between the trunks. A shape that did not move with the others. A figure taller than the rest. Its form partially obscured by the shadows. Its head lowered slightly, as if listening rather than watching. And Ronan's eyes narrowed because that was it. The source. Not the heads, not the bodies, but the thing that remained behind them directing everything that moved. And the bodies reacted to it immediately, their formation tightening further, their movements sharpening, as if its presence alone reinforced their coordination. And Ronan stepped toward it without hesitation, because cutting down the pieces would not end this. Not while the source remained, and the bodies surged to intercept him. Their attacks overlapping more aggressively. Now their purpose no longer to test or contain, but to stop him from reaching what lay behind them. And he moved through them with increasing force, his blade cutting a path, rather than responding to each strike individually. Each motion pushing him forward rather than holding him in place. And the resistance changed as he closed the distance. The bodies stronger, now faster, their movements more precise, as if the closer he came, the more control the source exerted over them. And one caught him. Then not with teeth, not with a strike, but with its grip. The hooked fingers closing around his arm, the strength behind it, greater than before, enough to hold him for a fraction of a second. And that was all the others needed. Two more lunging in from either side, and Ronan reacted instantly, twisting his body against the hold, his blade cutting down through the arm that gripped him, the steel severing it at the joint. Before he stepped through the opening, the other strikes passing just behind him, close enough to feel the air shift, but not enough to connect. And he did not stop. He did not turn. He drove forward directly toward the figure between the trees, because now he understood everything. The heads carried the voice, the bodies carried the force, but the control came from that one point, that one presence that did not need to move to act. And as he broke through the last of the intercepting forms, the figure lifted its head slightly. And for a moment he saw it clearly. The face not whole, not intact, but layered. The skin stretched over it in uneven patches as if taken from many different sources. The features distorted, the eyes set too deep, the mouth too wide, and from around its neck hung several of the heads, He had seen earlier attached not by rope, not by anything visible, but held in place as if bound to it directly, and as it moved, those heads shifted with it, their mouths opening in unison, the voices rising together, not whispering now, but speaking louder, clearer, forming words that overlapped into something almost coherent, and Ronan felt the pressure of it, not in sound, but in presence, as if the air itself resisted his movement, as if the voices tried to hold him in place. And that was the truth. Not just a collector, not just a hunter. This thing used the heads to extend itself, to see, to speak, to control the bodies that moved without them. And as long as those heads remained connected, the reach of it would extend far beyond its own form. And Ronan Vorn tightened his grip on the blade as he closed the final distance, because now he knew where to. Strike not at the bodies, not at the heads themselves, but at the one thing that bound them together, the source that turned them into something more than dead flesh. And if that could be broken, everything else would fall with it, but only if he reached it before the voices and the bodies closed the space again and dragged him down into the same silence that had taken the others. Ronan did not slow as he closed the distance, because slowing now would only give the bodies time to reform the barrier and the voices time to tighten their hold. And he had already felt how they pressed against his movement, how they tried to turn his steps away from the source. So he drove forward through it. Instead, his blade cutting down the last of the intercepting forms, the steel splitting through one then another, the bodies collapsing, but not before buying the moment they needed for the rest to close. And he stepped inside that closing gap without hesitation, forcing the distance until there was nothing between him and the figure that stood at the center of it all, and the creature did not retreat. It did not step back. It stood its ground, the heads around its neck lifting slightly, their mouths opening in unison as the sound rose louder, clearer, the words almost forming into something that could be understood, and the pressure of it hit him. Then not enough to stop him, but enough to slow the edge of his movement, as if the air itself resisted him. And Ronan turned into it, pushing through that resistance, his blade already rising in a tight, controlled arc, aimed not at the outer layers, not at the heads, but at the point where they connected, where the neck of the creature met the mass of what it carried, and the creature reacted instantly, its arm coming up, to intercept the movement faster than it should have been, its reach longer, as if the bodies it controlled lent its strength even here, and the strike met his blade with a force that pushed him offline just enough to deflect the cut and the heads around its neck shifted sharply, their mouths opening wider, the sound breaking into something harsher, something closer to a scream, and the bodies behind him surged forward again, their movement faster, more desperate, as if they had been given a single command to stop him at any cost. And Ronan adjusted immediately, stepping inside the creature's reach instead of pulling back his shoulder, colliding with its frame. The impact enough to disrupt its balance for a fraction of a second, and that was all he needed. His blade driving forward, not in a wide swing, but in a direct thrust, aimed into the center of its chest, where the layers of skin were thinner, where the structure beneath felt less reinforced, and the steel struck deep. The resistance different from the bodies, not hollow, not shifting, but held together by something that pushed back. And he forced it further, twisting hard, driving through that resistance until he felt it. The connection, not a physical bond, but something that held everything together, everything it controlled, and the reaction was immediate and violent. The creature convulsing the heads around its neck, jerking in unison, the voices breaking apart into fragments, the control over the bodies faltering for a fraction of a second. And Ronan did not pull back. He stepped closer, forcing the blade deeper. Still, ignoring the way the creature's limbs struck out blindly. The blows glancing off him, not precise enough to land cleanly because the coordination was already breaking, and he twisted again. And this time something gave, not gradually, not partially, but completely. The pressure in the air collapsing. The voices cutting off mid-sound, as if they had been severed from their source. And the creature staggered its entire form, losing cohesion, the heads slipping from their positions, falling away one by one as the connection that held them in place failed and Ronan wrenched the blade free, stepping back as it took one uneven step, then another before collapsing into the ground. The impact, final. The structure that had held it together gone, and the change in the forest was instant. The bodies that had surrounded him, losing all coordination, their movements breaking into chaos, some collapsing, where they stood, others moving in short, aimless bursts before falling still, as if whatever guided them had been removed completely, and the heads that had hung in the trees went silent, their mouths closing, their eyes going still, the voices gone as if they had never existed at all. And Ronan stood there for a moment longer, his breathing steady, despite the weight of the fight, his gaze fixed on the fallen form, because he needed to be certain, needed to see that it would not rise again. And when it did not, he lowered his blade, slowly turning away from it, as the forest settled around him, the silence returning not heavy, not waiting, just empty, the way it should have been from the beginning. And he moved back through the trees without hesitation, the path no longer hidden, the direction clear without the voices to twist it. And when he reached the edge of the forest, the village beyond it, still quiet, still waiting, he stepped out into the open, without looking back, because there was nothing left behind him that could follow, nothing left that could call out to the living with the voices of the dead. And as he walked away, the wind moved through the trees behind him, carrying no sound, no whisper, no trace of what had been there before, only silence, and the knowledge that something like this did not come from nowhere. It was made, shaped by something deeper, something that would one day try again, somewhere else where the voices would begin before anyone understood what they were hearing. And by then, it would already be too late.